Hello, Ryan. How's it going? Okay. I don't know if that's good or bad because I don't know what you said, kind of as you pointed out in your last video. I guess we don't know what the other person is dealing with. So maybe I shouldn't assume that it's always good, but whatever it is, I hope that you're dealing with it well, so to speak. Hope that makes sense. Last time you shared a letter from Vincent van Gogh in which, the man, if you hear whining, that's my puppy. It is what it is. She's adorable. Anyway, you shared a letter from Vincent van Gogh, a man who was plagued with mental illness. He had a hard time mentally, but then he expressed his creativity or healing through his creativity. And I start to ponder that, and I was like, huh, that's interesting. Like I try to be creative, but in the sense that I do writing. Maybe I'm doing like some nonfiction writing or script writing for a one of these videos, and then of course I'm writing some stories as well. Hopefully they develop into something more one day. And I was thinking like if I am writing, say I suffer with something like a personality disorder in particular, where so I don't want to get into too much detail, but someone who struggles with a personality disorder, it affects the way they think, except it affects the way they deal with reality. It's hard for them to see rational thought. But I can imagine that if you're trying to write a story and you really get into a character and you like help them reason through a scenario, and it's like, whoa, that's not what's happening. That and you as you're creating this story, as you're creating this character who's dealing with a specific conflict or something, and they have to reason it out and then move forward and deal with it rationally so that the reader understands. I was like, I could see how that could be healing for the author. Like if I struggle to deal with reality, but then I have to create a reality for my character to deal with, I can see it's like, whoa, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. And then maybe I can ponder that and extrapolate it into my own mind, my own reality, and realize, oh, maybe that's not real, if that makes sense. So I can see how this has, it can help with depression and anxiety, but I think it might also help with other more severe disorders. But I'm also not a psychologist or a doctor or anything, so just a thought that I had. I doubt that it has any merit in the real world, but maybe. Anyway, I still think that we should be creative. So today I am going to share with you a story, and this is actually going to be a part one. I'm going to do part one today and part two next week. And the reason for that is that 3 weeks from today, I won't be able to respond to your video. So I'm going to do 2 weeks in a row, and then you'll do that one, and then we'll be back on track to every other because I'll be visiting people and whatnot. So yeah, I hope that's okay with you. You get a break for 2 weeks before resuming our normal schedule. So today is part one, and I decided that it was my turn to share a story. So here we go. This is the story of a girl. Just kidding. I'm not going to do that to you. This is a story of a real life person, and I, as I've shared many times, my memory is terrible, so I'm just going to read most of it, and going to try to make it um interesting. I'm going to skip over a lot of details because it's historical and like details matter, but also I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty and I want to keep this short. So, yeah. This is the story of William Marshal, or William the Marshal, first Earl of Pembroke. He was eulogized by Stephen Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury, as the greatest knight who ever lived. He was born in either 1146 or 1147 AD. He was not the oldest son of his father John Marshal, so he inherited no land from his father, but by the end of his life he had served five different English kings, successfully helped advise the signing of Magna Carta, or the Great Charter of Liberties, and then died at the old age of 70, which is quite a long time. Quite the old age for the time. So let's get into his story. When William was just, oh, I'm also a little sick, so my voice might crack quite a bit. When William was just 5 years old, England was in the middle of a civil war, and his father sided against the crown. William, for somehow, was taken hostage by the king. When John's castle was being attacked, the king threatened to kill William as a negotiating technique. John replied, "Go ahead. I still have the hammer and anvil with which to forge new sons." Stephen the king then strapped the 5-year-old to a trebuchet and was prepared to kill him, but he relented. William remained a hostage for the king a while longer. So let's fast forward to the age of 12. He was sent to a place in Normandy, which is across the English Channel in what is now known as its modern day France, but at the time they were warring over the area of Normandy. So at the time it was claimed by the English crown. He was raised by his mother's cousin in the ways of knighthood. He began with basic education for nobles at the time, which would have been learning about literature, Latin, and chivalry, things like that, taking care of horses. At 20 years old, while on a campaign, he was knighted. Later, he was part of a party led by Patrick of Salisbury that was escorting Queen Eleanor of Aquitaine, which she has quite the story too. Maybe I'll tell that one day. Anyway, so they were escorting this queen, the Queen of England, and their party was ambushed. The queen escaped without injury. Patrick was killed, but Marshal was wounded in the thigh and captured. While captured, someone unknown took pity on him and provided linens to wrap around his leg wound to prevent infection, and he was later ransomed by Queen Eleanor, who was apparently impressed by his bravery. After his release, William spent time competing in tournaments, winning a lot of money, and gaining quite a bit of fame. William was then appointed to be the tutor of arms for King Henry II's son, who would later become called Henry the Young King, or I'm going to call him Young Henry, to distinguish him between Henry II. And then Henry's other brother, Henry, becomes Henry III, King of England, even though his older brother was Henry the Young King, and for both of them, their father was Henry II. Confused? Me too. Okay, Henry II, sorry, he was Henry II's son. Young Henry began a revolt against his father and quickly earned the title Henry the Young King, although he never really had any real power. He was, in name only, a co-reigning king, but he never had real power. It was just a title, basically, that his father gave him before he started this revolt against him. The revolt was quickly quashed. William and Henry then spent time traveling with Henry II. Basically, King Henry II was like, "I'm going to keep a close eye on you." William he was in the service to young Henry, so he would have stayed with him, stayed loyal to him, and in his service throughout this time. Okay. After about 18 months of this, they asked permission to travel Europe and compete in tournaments. Both men went, William serving young Henry, and they won fame, money, and began a retinue, which would have been knights who served them, who were loyal to them. So they, began this retinue. People started following them. They would travel together, big group. And later, William was accused of having an affair with young Henry's wife. It appears, based on the circumstantial evidence only of William's life, the character that he held throughout his life, that this affair was completely fabricated in order to destroy him politically. Whether that's true or not, there's no really evidence to point either way. Young Henry believed the story and removed William from his service in early 1183. Also in January of 1183, young Henry declared war on his brother, Richard I, later known as Richard the Lionheart. Possibly needing help in his war, young Henry cleared William of the charges against him, and William re-entered the service to the young king. The young king unfortunately got very sick and died a month later in June of 1183. And it's unclear when, but at some point in his life, Henry, the young king, had taken a vow to visit the Holy Land on a crusade. He was only 26, I believe, when he died, and he was unable to fulfill that vow, but on his deathbed, he asked William Marshal if he would be willing to take up that vow and fulfill it. William Marshal accepted that vow. Now, that's where we're going to conclude for today. Next week, we'll talk about William Marshal's trip to the Holy Land, his service to the other kings of England, and then his death. But I wanted to talk about his early life because to me it's very important that, I mean, from a very young age, it's just sad that he was strapped to a trebuchet and used as a pawn in his dad's power game. And yet, luckily, the king at the time, King Stephen, relented. Um, as far as I can tell, William was always loyal to the crown of England. He was as loyal as possible. That's why he protected the queen, and then later she was impressed by his bravery, and ransomed to get him, paid the ransom to get him back into her service, and then appointed him as the tutor in arms for her son, which is just absolutely incredible. And yet, so he has this tumultuous and eventful life, and he remains loyal to the crown. And when he's asked, I was unable to fulfill my vow. Will you do it for me in my name? And he says, yes. So I think that so far, this is an incredible story of a man who, regardless of his circumstances, is trying to be the best person he can be. Yeah, so I'm excited for part two. This is all from a book that I read called The Greatest Night by Thomas Asbridge. Um, yeah, I had never heard of this guy, and I found this book, and then I read it, and now I'm like, William Marshal, I think he should be in my list of top 10 favorite people that's on the Substack, dltucker.substack.com, the Modern Quest Substack, right pinned at the top, Dylan's top 10. I'm pretty sure William Marshal is listed as my top 10 favorite people. Dan Jones, historian, he wrote this book, Powers and Thrones. He dedicated like half a chapter to the life of William Marshal. He declared William Marshal as the coolest person in medieval history. So I'm excited for part two. That'll come to you next week on Speeches and Stories, Lyrics and Letters. See you next time. Bye.